Hey everybody, Scotia here with an interesting video today, and it's one that I've been meaning to do earlier in the week, but I just didn't have the time, got distracted by stuff, so I'm here doing it now. And it's an interesting video because the director of Street Fighter 5, Takayuki Nakayama, was having a Twitter conversation with somebody, and he was dropping a lot of interesting info in these tweets about the story of Street Fighter 5, and kind of giving some clues as to maybe what's going to happen for the future of Street Fighter. So it's a lot of interesting stuff, and I'm basically just going to go through it quickly and kind of break down what he said, what he means by it, what he could mean by it, and kind of maybe go through the future of what this could mean for the future of Street Fighter and possibly Street Fighter 6. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. First off though, I do want to thank Rice from Reset Era, because he was really the one that compiled a lot of this info together, and I have checked the tweets because all the tweets are unfortunately in Japanese, so there's no 100% concrete translation. But I did check the tweets in the machine translation, and though it's rough, it does kind of match up with what he said, so I do trust this list, this compiled info. So yeah, just want to give a shout out to him because he really compiled a lot of it together. So right off the bat, the most interesting piece of info from these series of tweets, and the one that's been causing the most buzz online, is that in Street Fighter 5, some of the character stories have actually gone past Street Fighter 3 in the timeline, which is something I've always kind of complained about. It's something I've never liked. I've never liked that we've never gone past Street Fighter 3. I've always hated how Capcom seems scared or kind of reluctant to go past that game. But it turns out the entire time I've been saying this, we actually have gone past it, which is kind of crazy that, like, oh, it's just happened. We just didn't know about it. And we don't know for sure which character stories are the ones that have gone past Street Fighter 3. He kind of said that some stories have kind of like happened during and after, was I think the wording on it. So some character stories or some parts of the character stories have happened during Street Fighter 3, some have happened after. The only one he straight up confirmed was was around Street Fighter 3, was the end of Ed's character story. That's the part where Ed and kind of gathers with the rest of Neo Shadaloo. He's with Falk and the gorilla, who I'll be talking about in a minute, and the other guy, and they're all gathered at the end. It's kind of like, it's the first time he saw Neo Shadaloo. That is confirmed now. That scene, that end shot, that happens during Street Fighter 3. And again, he didn't say which stories took place after. He did mention that some take place after. In my opinion, I think Gil's character story is one of them, and I kind of thought it even back in like when his character story came out, when Gil came out a couple of years ago. I kind of was thinking, is this taking place after 3? And the main reason I thought this was because it was what seemed like an error, like a retcon or just a general error, or like they just forgot about it. But in Gil's character story, Urien, when talking about Gil to Colleen, calls Gil the Emperor. And of course, if you've seen my videos or if you've played the Street Fighter 3 series, you'll know that Urien doesn't even know the role of Emperor exists within the society until Second Impact. So when I saw that and I saw him call him Emperor, I was immediately, oh, so does this take place after Second Impact? Or is this just an error, like they're just changing it so that Gil was always the Emperor? And I kind of at the time wrote it off as just, Urien just, he always knew he was Emperor, just as a retcon. But now that we know for a fact that some character stories actually take place after Street Fighter 3, I'm kind of thinking, maybe this is a character story that takes place after 3, and it's one that I'm probably gonna have to go back and look at with a closer eye now, kind of look at it under the lens of like, oh, this actually takes place after 3, and kind of what that means. And so what does it mean? At the moment, we don't really know, because obviously we don't really know where Street Fighter 6 is going, or just the future of the series in general. Now though, I'm more convinced than ever that we're finally going to be moving past Street Fighter 3 with Street Fighter 6. I think if Street Fighter 6 is set before Street Fighter 3, again, it is just... I couldn't even give you a reason or like a feeling or a word that would just express how frustrating that would be. Like, I would feel like it would be pure incompetence on Capcom's part at this point to like have it confirmed by the director of the game that like, hey, we're finally, elements of this game is taking place after 3, and then you get to 6, and 6 is either like a retcon, or it's a reboot, or a retelling, or it just happens. Oh, it happens 5 minutes before Street Fighter 3. It has to take place at least towards the end of Third Strike, preferably for me, sometime after Third Strike. I wouldn't like it if if Street Fighter 6 was like immediately after Third Strike. It would be fine. I would take it, trust me, believe me. Just having it after 3 would be enough for me. But if I had, if it was my ideal world, if I had my say, I would have it set, sometime, at least a year or two after 3, just to kind of, just to finally just definitely move past it instead of kind of clinging around it. That's just my kind of thing. But yeah, this is big news. I mean, it's kind of like been brushed under the radar quite a bit, because obviously this was dropped in a tweet by the director that was in Japanese and was only translated by people who just happened to see it. And it's kind of like, nobody really knows about it outside the people who kind of look out for these things and discuss these things and care about these things, like me and obviously you, the ones listening. And it's like, it's just crazy to me. It's like, oh, we're finally doing it. And it's like, of course Capcom would just completely just not even mention that we finally passed it, not even like allude to it or kind of hint it. It's like, no, it's so like Capcom. It's such a Capcom way of doing it. It's like, how did we like finally know we moved past Street Fighter 3? Oh, it was in a tweet. Like, oh, come on. But yeah, I'm incredibly happy. It's finally good that like we're finally moving past it. It's like Street Fighter 3, especially Third Strike, was like, what, 22 years ago now, and it's like now, like, obviously we don't know exactly when, like how far after 3 we've moved past it. I personally think Street Fighter 5 only goes up to probably near the end of Second Impact. I don't think they've gone past Third Strike yet, so I'm hoping Street Fighter 6 at least takes place after Third Strike. Sorry, but I would take, even if it was after Second Impact, I would, I would take it. I wouldn't be happy about it, but I would take it. Yeah, this is really, really cool, and definitely a good sign of things to come. I'm very optimistic now about Street Fighter 6. So other than the Street Fighter 3 info, Nakayama only really talked about Neo Shadaloo, Ed, Bison, Psycho Power, including the name of the gorilla that appears with Ed and the rest of Neo Shadaloo at the end of Ed's character story. And we never knew the name of the gorilla or the other guy that are with Ed and Falk. We just knew that they were part of Neo Shadaloo. But Nakayama revealed the name of the gorilla, and I'm sorry if I butcher this, but the name of the gorilla is Baba Mwalimu, which I believe is Swahili for father teacher. Nakayama also revealed that each member of Neo Shadaloo has inherited a different characteristic of M. Bison, such as Falk being able to inject Psycho Power into objects such as a staff, which we see in her moveset, Ed being able to eject Psycho Power, which again we see in his moveset, the guy with the knives that we don't know the name of being able to teleport, and the gorilla having super intelligence. Nakayama also shared a story from the development of Street Fighter 5 where he said that Ed's name came about when Nakayama wrote a note to a designer, and the note said Ed Boy, with Ed being in capital letters and meaning ending. And the designer saw this note and saw the abbreviation of Ed in capital letters and thought that was the name of the character that was decided, and so started calling the character Ed. And when Nakayama found out, he actually thought the name was cool, so they just decided to keep it. So with Ed being nicknamed originally Ending Boy, maybe this kind of implies bigger things for him. Maybe he has a kind of more direct influence into the ending of the current Street Fighter storyline, or maybe just because of his role as maybe kind of being the ending of Street Fighter 5 that kind of ties into Street Fighter 6. But I don't know, that's just my theory. The only other quote from Nakayama about Neo Shadaloo is unfortunately machine translated, so it's not 100% accurate. So thanks again to Rice for kind of summing it up in a way that I can read out to you. So the quote goes, "There's a reason for splitting up Bison's abilities. Maybe he knew he was going to have a confrontation with Ryu, or maybe he wants to come back in some way and continue as a king of fighting, even if his body is destroyed. I hope we can talk about that someday. As for the names, as someone noticed, the initials are B, Baba Mwalimu, E, Ed, F, Falk, and G. I'm reaching to his character limit." So the end of that quote there is a bit of a funny joke, because as he finally talks about G and starts to reveal something about G, he conveniently reaches to his character limit. So that's what he's kind of referring to at the end there. I don't really know what to make of this quote, because obviously with it being machine translated, there's no real way to know for sure what he said, and I kind of don't want to start theorizing about something that could end up being inaccurate. So I don't really want to go too far into this, but it does sound like, at the very least, that G is related to Neo Shadaloo and Bison and Psycho Power. So I'm very interested to see where that goes, because there's not a lot we know about G, and G seems like a very important character. If you've been following the game in the last couple of years since G came out, the game's been shifting towards G being the main villain of the next kind of story arc. So I'm very interested to see where that goes. But yeah, it's a very interesting quote. Now, there's one more quote I want to talk about, and I'm kind of reluctant to bring this one up because we don't really know if Nakayama meant what he meant to say here, or if there's confusion about what he said. because at some point in this Twitter conversation, the user he's talking to asks Nakayama about Laura's Street Fighter 3 arcade ending, and if you don't know, in Street Fighter 5 there are different arcade endings based on different Street Fighter games, and in the Street Fighter 3 arcade route, Laura is in there because she represents Sean, because Sean obviously isn't playable in Street Fighter 5, but in Laura's arcade ending for the Street Fighter 3 route, she sees a magazine with pictures of Sean winning a tournament in it, and obviously she's happy and she's proud, Sean's happy, and at the time it was like, holy shit, like Sean's won something, that's insane, like that's crazy, like he doesn't get to win stuff often. But then it was kind of like, oh, you know, it's just a non-canon arcade route, it doesn't really matter, you know, no one's ever going to really reference it again. So I kind of forgot about it, but this user brings this up because of Nakayama saying that Elements of 5 takes place during and after Street Fighter 3. So this person was like, oh, so does this mean Sean actually won this tournament after Street Fighter 3? And again, this is the confusion, because Nakayama, he seems to say, yes, Sean won this tournament, like this is canon, Sean actually won this. But at the same time, the person that he's replying to, the tweet he's replying to, where this person asks about Sean, he's asking two questions at once, and the machine translation kind of makes it unclear which question Nakayama is saying yes to. And because I read this at first and I was like, holy shit, he confirmed it, like that's real, like, because obviously if you've seen my other video I did on Sean, in the defense of, I love Sean, he's one of my favorite Street Fighter characters, I really wish he would get more respect. And this is obviously, this would be a big way in kind of going about that. And I was really excited at first, but then I kind of like looked at it and I'm like, it's a bit unclear what he actually means here. So I was kind of like, I didn't really want to mention it, but I did mention it anyway, because I've seen other people have been doing videos on these tweets. I know Rufalmonga did one, and he mentioned Sean. I only mentioned him briefly, but I kind of just want to bring it up because obviously I care a lot about Sean, and if this does end up being true, this is a big win for him as a character that in the eyes of Capcom has never really gotten a lot of respect. And yeah, I really hope it's true. I really hope Nakayama was actually confirming this and not just kind of like saying this was just a hypothetical, like, oh, it's whatever, you know, like, oh, it's just bullshit. I don't know. I just hope it's true. But I just wanted to mention it because obviously if it ends up being true, it's very important to me. And yeah, it's just a lot of confusion. I hope it gets clarified soon. So now we get into the final quote from Nakayama, and this one is quite interesting to me because it actually ties into something I talked about ages ago, and it's about Rose. And if you remember, if you watched the video ages ago, back when Rose's character story came out, her ending seemed to imply that she was going to be rebooting the series back to Alpha. And I've complained to death about that back in that video. You know, people were very vocal about it, saying that I was overreacting. At the time, I didn't think so. I thought it was a legitimate concern at the time. Now I'm not really that bothered about it. But this was kind of tied into it because Nakayama kind of goes into what the deal with Rose is, what her kind of story is, or where her story is kind of going, and how it ties into her kind of previous roles in the series. And what he says about Rose is that he says that Rose experiences a vision of Bison causing the end of the world after his death, so she decides to effectively go back in time and kill a young Bison in order to prevent Shadow's rise and the eventual apocalypse. And this ties into what Rose's character story was about. She realizes that there's an impending threat she can't stop there in the present, so what she does, she says, oh, I have to put myself back into I have to take my mind that has experienced everything since Alpha and take that mind and take it into my body from the Alpha. So take my Street Fighter 5 mind and put it in my Alpha body so that my Alpha self can stop things before things get too bad. And obviously that's what the implication was, and I was like, oh, they're going to reboot the series back to Alpha, this is awful, blah 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 blah. But something I actually didn't know about until this all came out. And again, I have to thank Rice for this. I've thanked him so many times in this video, but he really helped a lot with these tweets. Is that in Rose's kind of like video that Capcom did before she came out, where they kind of went over her character and her story and her moveset, there's a line said at the end, and it's literally like 3 or 4 words said by Matt Edwards, who works at Capcom UK, and it's a line that completely missed me, and I did not know this was said. But this was before the character story came out. But he said that Rose is stuck in a time loop, and by this it means that Rose is stuck in a time loop because she is eternally sending herself back to Alpha. So she has her Alpha self She goes through everything in Alpha, she fights Bison, she dies, she does this, she comes back, goes through the rest of the series, and then Street Fighter 5 realizes, oh no, things are getting bad, I need to send myself back to Alpha. So she's stuck in a time loop, and Nakayama confirms this. So Rose has been stuck in a time loop since the Alpha games. So it actually seems like this whole thing, this whole reboot I was worried about, actually isn't that big of a deal. It's something that has been technically going on for years now. Again, we just never knew it. I still think it's going to tie into Street Fighter 6 somehow. I think we'll see an element of Rose going back to the Alpha series. I think maybe, you know, if they do another cinematic story, I hope they don't, personally. But if they do something with the story, if they do a character story again, or an arcade ending and Rose is in there, I feel like we're going to see Rose actually back in Alpha for a bit. I don't think the whole series is going back to Alpha, but it's interesting to me that this literally, I never knew this was actually said by Capcom ages ago, before she even came out. But yeah, so Rose is actually already stuck in a time loop, and this implies that Rose sending herself back to the past, back to Alpha, is actually unsuccessful, because obviously if it worked, she wouldn't be stuck in a time loop. So it's a very interesting detail, and it makes me a lot more interested in what's going on with Rose now, because I was very concerned. Obviously, if you watch that video, you'll know I was not happy about it. Now I'm like, kind of like, oh man, like if I'd known that they'd said she was in a time loop back then, I probably wouldn't have even made that video. I probably would have, but I probably wouldn't have been as dramatic about it. So yeah, it's very interesting detail, and like it's not the biggest drop. It's not the biggest bombshell drop. I definitely think Street Fighter 3, you know, already having been passed, is the bigger news thing from all of this. But I think that's a very interesting thing, and it's kind of come full circle for me from that video I made about Rose. Because then quite a lot of people were saying I was overreacting, and turns out they were right. But yeah, it's still interesting that she's actually stuck in a time loop, and yeah, I'm interested in seeing where that goes. So yeah, that's pretty much everything major from Nakayama's tweets covered. I do highly recommend following him on Twitter, by the way. He is an amazing follow. He is such a fan of Capcom. It's insane, like how much of a treasure trove of just art and facts he is. I mean, even if you don't understand Japanese or don't trust machine translations, the guy is such a fan of Capcom. You'll get something out of it just by following him. I do definitely think the series is in good hands. But yeah, obviously the major thing from this was Street Fighter 3 kind of like finally moving past it. That was a big deal. That's a big deal for me. It's a big deal for quite a lot of people. It's something we've been waiting for so long. To finally have it happened in such a weird Capcom-ish way is just, it is really interesting. It just gets me excited for the future of Street Fighter. Speaking of the future of Street Fighter, Luke is still scheduled for this month, I believe. We'll probably find out when he's going to be releasing soon. I am going to try and do a stream. It won't be a long stream, but I'll just want to do his character story and his arcade ending. So I'll stream that through my YouTube channel. So it'll appear on here if you want to follow it when he releases. It'll only be like an hour or so, just so I go through his character story, maybe go over theories and stuff, see if or how he links to Street Fighter 6. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check it out. I'll definitely be doing a lot of videos on Luke. Kind of going over what we know about Street Fighter 6 as we get closer to that. So yeah, thanks for listening. I'm sorry I took so long to do this. I know I'd actually had people on Twitter kind of messaging me about it, asking if I was going to cover this, which I'm grateful for. I'm glad people care enough to, you know, want to hear my opinion on things. But yeah, I felt bad because it was like I should have done this when this broke, because this is like 2 days old now, but I just didn't have the time to get around it. I had other stuff going on. So yeah, thanks again for listening. See you soon, hopefully, for some Luke stuff. Obviously, King of Fighters 15 stuff's coming out every other week. The character stories are coming, the team stories, are coming out. So still quite a lot of stuff coming up on the channel. Hope you're all looking forward to it. Thank you again for all the support. Nearly at 300 subscribers. I was literally thanking you all for 200 like a week or so ago, which is insane. Thank you all so much. I'm going to go now, so thank you again, and goodbye.
We await your return, warrior.